I never expected a simple trip to the thrift store to lead to all this. It was just supposed to be a fun night with Sarah and Jake, digging through dusty shelves for old horror movies, something to bring back those creepy, late-night vibes we loved as kids. We'd already found a couple of classics when Sarah called us over. "Check this out," she said, holding up a vase tape without a label, just blank and worn, like it had been forgotten for years. Jake joked about it being cursed, but there was something about it that caught my attention, something off but intriguing. Back at my apartment, we set up the VCR, the familiar hum of the machine adding to the nostalgic atmosphere. The air was filled with that old, musty smell of the thrift store, mixed with the scent of popcorn we'd just made. We were all laughing, reminiscing about the ridiculous horror movies we used to watch, the kind with terrible effects and over-the-top acting. We had no idea what was on that tape, but that was the fun of it, uncovering some forgotten, creepy gem. Little did we know, that excitement would soon turn into something far more sinister. The moment the tape started playing, I felt a shift in the room. The screen flickered to life, showing a grainy, low-budget horror film. It wasn't anything special at first, just a group of people gathered around a TV, watching an unmarked tape, much like we were. But there was something unsettling about it, something that made the shadows in my apartment seem darker, the air around us colder. I laughed it off, trying to keep the mood light, but I could tell Sarah and Jake felt it too. The room, once filled with the warm glow of our movie night, now seemed off. The flickering light from the TV cast strange, elongated shadows on the walls, and every time the film distorted, the sound warping into a low, ominous hum. A chill ran down my spine. On the screen, the characters began to experience strange events. Their lights flickered, the TV emitted bizarre noises, and something unseen seemed to lurk just out of frame. Then, almost on cue, the lights in my apartment flickered, and the TV hissed with static. I exchanged a glance with Sarah and Jake, unease creeping in. The movie was no longer just entertainment. It was like looking into a twisted mirror, reflecting a growing terror in our own space. The line between the movie and reality blurred faster than I could comprehend. On the screen, the characters were panicking. Objects in their room moved by themselves, and shadows twisted into unnatural shapes. Suddenly, I felt a cold gust brush past me, and I watched in horror as my own coffee table slid across the floor, seemingly by its own will. Sarah screamed, and Jake jumped to his feet, knocking over a lamp that shouldn't have fallen so easily. Every instinct told me to run, but when I lunged for the remote to stop the tape, the buttons were unresponsive. The VCR made a sickening grinding noise, refusing to eject the tape, and the movie continued to play, pulling us deeper into its nightmare. Then, the spirit appeared on the screen, a grotesque figure, its limbs distorted and unnatural, crawling out of the TV. My breath caught in my throat as it seemed to emerge from the screen, its cold, hollow eyes locking onto us. We bolted for the door, but it was as if the apartment had turned against us. The exits were gone, replaced by solid walls. The spirit was now fully in our world, inching closer with each moment, the dread in the room suffocating. We were no longer just watching the horror, we were living it, and there was no way out. Desperation took over as the spirit drew closer, its twisted form barely held together by whatever dark force had dragged it from the screen. With nowhere to run, I grabbed the VCR, lifting it above my head and smashing it to the ground with all my strength. The plastic shattered, sparks flew, and for a brief moment, I thought we might be free. But instead of stopping the horror, I watched in terror as the spirit solidified, its grotesque features becoming horrifyingly real. The room plunged into an icy darkness as the entity loomed over us, its presence filling every corner. Sarah and Jake screamed, their voices shrill with panic as invisible forces began to drag them toward the TV. I tried to hold on, to pull them back, but it was like fighting against a tidal wave. My fingers slipped, and I could only watch as Jake was sucked into the screen, his body twisting and warping into the film. Sarah was next, her terrified eyes locking with mine before she too was consumed. Her scream cut short as the TV swallowed her whole. I felt the same force gripping me, pulling me closer to the screen's flickering surface. My own scream echoed in my ears as the room twisted and warped around me. The last thing I saw before being pulled into the darkness was the cursed tape lying on the floor, the apartment silent except for the soft hum of the TV and the faint, fading echoes of our screams.
It was supposed to be a perfect, low-key night. I'd been dying to watch this foreign horror film everyone was raving about, and I couldn't wait to share it with Maya. We'd made our usual preparations: snacks, drinks, and an oversized blanket to curl up under in my cozy living room. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that wraps around you like a warm embrace. The movie started, and we were instantly hooked, the subtitles guiding us through the eerie plotline that was just the right amount of creepy. At first, everything felt just right. The flickering light from the TV, the distant hum of crickets outside, and the buttery smell of popcorn. It all set the mood for a classic horror experience. Maya and I exchanged the occasional glance, half smiling at the jump scares and gripping the blanket during the tense moments. But then, as the film progressed, I noticed something strange. The subtitles didn't always match what was being said on screen. A phrase here, a word there. Nothing too glaring, but enough to catch my attention. Probably just a bad translation, I thought, shrugging it off. Maya didn't seem to notice, and I didn't want to ruin the vibe, so I let it slide, pushing away the faint unease that started creeping in. As the movie went on, I couldn't ignore the strange feeling creeping up my spine. The subtitles had started to change, and not in a way I could easily explain. At first, they just seemed off, random phrases that didn't fit the dialogue at all. "Don't look behind you," flashed across the screen at one point, though the characters were in the middle of a mundane conversation. I glanced at Maya, wondering if she noticed, but she was fully absorbed, her eyes fixed on the screen. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was just a weird glitch or a mistranslation, but then the subtitles grew even stranger. "She's watching," appeared during a scene where the characters were alone in a room, the text sending a chill through me. I shifted uncomfortably, casting a quick look over my shoulder, only to see the empty, darkened hallway behind us. Maya caught my movement and chuckled. "Probably just a glitch, Jess. Old movies, you know? They're always full of weird stuff like this." Her laugh was meant to be reassuring, but it only heightened my anxiety. I tried to focus on the movie, but the subtitles wouldn't let me. The next line made my heart skip a beat. "The light flickers." Just as I read it, the lamp in the corner dimmed for a split second before returning to normal. My breath caught in my throat, and I saw the words, "Jess is holding her breath," appear on the screen, clear as day. My stomach churned as it dawned on me that these subtitles weren't just random. They were describing what was happening in the room, right down to my own reactions. I felt exposed, like the film was peering into our very souls. Maya was still laughing it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly, terribly wrong. The movie continued, but by now, my heart was pounding. The subtitles had moved beyond the realm of strange and into something far more terrifying. It wasn't just describing what was happening around us anymore. It was reading my thoughts, my deepest fears, the ones I'd never spoken aloud to anyone, not even to Maya. I stared in horror as the words, "Jess is thinking about the dark basement," appeared on the screen. My breath hitched. I hadn't thought about that in years. The basement from my childhood home, where I'd had the worst nightmares, where I always felt like something was watching me. But there it was, laid bare in front of me, in white text against the flickering scenes of the film. I tried to keep calm, but then another line flashed across the screen. "Jess is remembering the nightmare." A shiver ran down my spine as images from that old nightmare surfaced. Images I'd buried deep, where shadowy figures lurked in the corners of my dreams. I hadn't told anyone about those dreams, and yet here they were, displayed like a twisted secret for both me and Maya to see. I glanced at Maya, who was no longer laughing. "Jess, it's just a coincidence," she said, though her voice wavered. But the next subtitle crushed any hope of it being a glitch. "Maya's laughter will stop." As if on cue, her chuckle died in her throat, and she went pale, the fear finally hitting her as well. We exchanged a look of pure dread. Before I could even process what was happening, the subtitles continued, now predicting immediate events with chilling accuracy. "The door will open by itself," the screen read. My eyes shot to the front door. Just as it creaked open, inch by inch, the darkness from the hallway creeping into the room. Panic surged through me. This wasn't just a movie anymore. This was something far more sinister, something that was inside our heads, manipulating our reality, and there was no escape. My hands shook as I grabbed the remote, desperate to shut off the TV, to make it stop. But no matter how many times I pressed the power button, the screen remained on, the subtitles continuing to crawl across it like some malevolent force. The words that appeared next sent a wave of cold terror through me. "Jess and Maya will meet a gruesome end." I glanced at Maya, her eyes wide with fear, her face drained of color. "Turn it off," she screamed, but I was already trying, frantically mashing every button on the remote. The TV stayed on, relentless, as the subtitles spelled out in chilling detail how we would die, how the darkness creeping through the door would consume us, how our bodies would be found days later, twisted and broken. The room felt like it was closing in, the air thick with dread. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Then, the final words appeared. "You should have listened." Before I could even process what that meant, the screen went black, plunging the room into complete darkness. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by a sudden, blood-curdling scream that echoed through the room. Our own voices twisted in terror. And then, nothing. Just an oppressive, unnatural quiet that left our fate hanging in the air, unresolved and horrifyingly real.
I've always been drawn to places that others avoid. So when I heard about the old cinema in a small Maine town that had been shut down for decades, I couldn't resist. The rumors of it being haunted only made it more intriguing. I convinced Rachel and Tom to come along for a private movie night in the abandoned theater. We brought our own projector and a classic horror movie, something to match the eerie vibe of the place. Sneaking in was easy. The cinema was crumbling, forgotten, and covered in layers of dust and neglect. The moment we stepped inside, I felt a thrill of excitement mixed with a tinge of unease. The place was even creepier than I imagined. Rows of tattered seats, peeling wallpaper, and the smell of dampness and decay hanging in the air. We made our way to the main theater, where the atmosphere felt almost alive, like the walls were whispering secrets. As we set up the projector, I wandered into the projection room out of curiosity. That's when I found it, an old film reel tucked away in a dusty corner. It wasn't labeled, except for a date scrawled on the side, one that indicated it had never been released. My heart raced as I held it up. "Guys, forget our movie," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty theater. "We have to watch this." Little did we know, We were about to unleash something far more terrifying than we could have imagined. The moment the film began to roll, I knew something was off. The screen flickered to life with a series of bizarre, disjointed images. Shadowy figures that seemed to move in ways that defied logic. Unsettling sound effects that seemed to echo unnervingly in the empty theater. The scenes were strange, almost surreal. An eerie landscape here, a grotesque close-up there, each one more disturbing than the last. The longer I watched, the more I felt the temperature drop around us, the chill seeping into my bones. Rachel and Tom seemed to find it amusing at first, laughing nervously and nudging each other whenever something particularly creepy happened on screen. "Classic horror stuff," Tom said with a grin, but his voice wavered. I tried to join in, to tell myself it was just an old, weird film, probably made to mess with the audience. But something wasn't right. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. As I watched, I began to notice that the shadows on the screen didn't move the way they should. They didn't just stay confined to the frame. They seemed to bleed out, stretching and twisting in ways that made my skin crawl. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then I saw one shadow slither down the screen and onto the theater wall, creeping closer to where we sat. "Did you see that?" I whispered, but Rachel just shook her head, still half smiling, though her eyes were wide. Tom didn't answer, his attention fixed on the screen, his grin faltering. The more we watched, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It felt like the walls were closing in on us, the air thickening with every passing second. The theater wasn't just a place anymore. It was a presence, something old and angry, waking up around us. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Not by the film, but by something else, something lurking in the darkness. And whatever it wasn't pleased we were there. As the movie dragged us deeper into its twisted narrative, the images on the screen started to change. The scenes became disturbingly familiar. The peeling wallpaper, the rows of decaying seats, the flickering light from the projector. I blinked, realizing with a growing sense of dread that the film was showing our exact surroundings, the very theater we were sitting in. Every detail was replicated perfectly, right down to the dusty curtains swaying slightly in the draft. It was like watching ourselves on screen, but we were still seated, helplessly glued to our spots. I felt the blood drain from my face as the film took an even darker turn. The characters on screen, a group of people just like us, sat huddled in fear, glancing nervously around the same decrepit theater. Then, the shadows in the film began to move, slowly creeping up on the unsuspecting group. My heart pounded as I watched the shadowy figures grow larger, more defined, their forms shifting in unnatural ways. One of the figures turned its head slowly, almost deliberately, as if it knew we were watching. And then, it started to emerge from the screen, its dark, twisted forms slipping into our reality. "Rachel, Tom, look," I barely managed to choke out, my voice trembling. They turned to the screen just as another shadow broke free, slithering down the aisle toward us. The temperature in the room plummeted, so cold I could see my breath fogging in the air. Rachel's smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure terror. Tom's hand tightened around the armrest, his knuckles white. "Ben, what the hell is happening?" Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. But I already knew. The film wasn't just a movie. It was a trap, a summoning ritual meant to bring these things into our world. The shadows fed on our fear, growing stronger, more tangible with each second. They moved closer, their forms becoming more defined and menacing, as if drawing strength from the terror they were instilling in us. Panic set in, gripping me with icy fingers. We were no longer just watching the horror unfold. We were part of it, trapped in a nightmare that was coming to life around us. The shadows had crossed the threshold, and they were coming for us. As the shadows loomed closer, their dark forms nearly tangible in the freezing air, I knew we had to act fast or we'd be lost to whatever nightmare we had unleashed. Without thinking, I bolted from my seat and raced toward the projector, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadows seemed to hesitate, unsure of what to do without the film to guide them. My hands shook as I fumbled with the controls, finally managing to stop the movie. For a moment, everything froze. The shadows wavered, as if confused. I didn't waste a second. Grabbing the film reel, I yanked it off the projector and smashed it against the floor with all my strength. The reel shattered, scattering fragments of cursed film across the dusty floor. As the reel broke, the shadows began to dissolve, their forms flickering and fading into the darkness from which they came. Within seconds, they were gone, leaving behind only an eerie, suffocating silence. The heavy atmosphere that had been pressing down on us lifted, but the terror still clung to us like a cold sweat. Shaken but alive, Rachel, Tom, and I quickly grabbed our things and fled the theater, not daring to look back. As we stepped outside, the oppressive weight lifted, replaced by the cold night air. We didn't need to say anything. The memory of those shadowy figures and the cursed film reel was etched into our minds, a reminder of the horror we narrowly escaped. We vowed never to return to that haunted cinema, leaving its dark secrets behind forever.